and we're just not finding them, or those numbers have dropped dramatically. So we would say fewer than 50.
And let me just tell the commissioners, Michelle and her staff have been really good at responding to our questions. Noemi and I, were assigned to a TIG to investigate this, and we have met with Michelle and some of her enforcement people, and we've always got all the information we requested. And I agree with her. I think the enforcement of illegal short-term rentals is no longer a problem that demands, a very high priority anymore. I think it's under control.
Thank you for that. I would agree with you if we continue to maintain what we're doing now. I think if we were to slack off, then we could see a resurgence, at least once visitors return, obviously. I'm very encouraged by how all of these efforts have come together. Regarding the number of warnings and violations, so for those who aren't familiar with our enforcement practices, the first thing that we do is issue a notice of warning that says we think you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, and if you don't stop, then you will be subject to a violation and potential fines. So in 2019, we issued 75 notices of violation. So that means after the notice of warning, the illegal activity did not stop. So we had to go ahead and issue a notice of violation. 2 of those resulted in the revocation of a permit. About $50,000 was collected, and we have about $300,000 pending various litigation or collections. That means that they've appealed those violations, and we have to wait for the resolution of the appeal before we could collect the fine, or perhaps the appeal was decided in our favor and the applicant has proceeded to court. In 2020, and reminding everyone that we do have the new fines for illegal vacation rentals of a $20,000 initial fine and a $10,000 daily fine. We have issued 92 notices of warning and 44 notices of violation. Of those 44 notices of violation, 7 of those were related to violations of the COVID emergency rules. 8 of those are pending resolution with Corporation Counsel. So if once we issue a notice of violation, they're given, the fine is assessed, and they have 30 days to appeal that to the Board of Variances and Appeals. 5 of those 44 are pending with the BDA. 8 of them did not file an appeal within that time frame. So if they did an appeal and we wait a little while and they haven't paid the fine, then we ask Corporation Counsel to get involved, and they write a demand letter, and it follows the litigation type process. And none have paid so far. We haven't collected any $1,000 initial fines or $10,000 initial fines yet, because all of those are either they haven't paid and we're pursuing it with Corporation Counsel, or they're pending the Board of Variances and Appeals.
Can you tell us how much the total was in the fines in the violation notices?
Well, the notice of violation says you're subject to a $20,000 initial fine and $10,000 daily if the activity doesn't stop. So I don't know with each of those if we have found evidence that the violation stopped. So I can't give you, I don't have a total of what those daily fines would have been. For the initial fines, it would be 44 times 20,000. You asked about current efforts to catch violators. We have 8 zoning inspectors. 1 has been out on medical leave. We expect him to return back in October, and we have 1 vacancy. So right now our workforce is actually 6 out of 8. And we also have 1 clerical position that's devoted to short-term rental enforcement. So that person processes all the notices of warning, notices of violation, keeps track of all the enforcement efforts. The chair asked for the new vendor who's helping us with the internet enforcement. You may recall we had been with a vendor named Lodging Revs, and we couldn't extend that contract any longer, so we had to put out a new request for proposals. And so we now have a new vendor, Host Compliance, whose name is probably more familiar to people than Lodging Revs was. And the chair asked for a copy of the RFP and the contract, which we sent. There is going to be some overlap between the two because we need Lodging Revs to download all of their data so that we can pass that along to Lodging Revs. So there's an overlap of a month or two while that transfer happens. Next questions had to do with a number of permitted short-term rental homes and bed and breakfast homes. That information is available on our website, separated by each community plan region. There are 157 permitted bed and breakfast homes and 227 permitted short-term rental homes and 10 transient vacation rentals, which don't fit into the SRH mold.
What are those, condos?
No, a good example is the Old Wailuku Inn. They have more than 6 bedrooms, and so they don't fit the standards for a B&B. So they have a conditional permit.
Okay.
All of those 10 would have some kind of discretionary permit, most likely a conditional permit. Or there are some that got conditional permits before the B&B and STRH laws were adopted. And so rather than go through the process to convert to a different kind of permit, they just maintain their conditional. You asked about recent changes or attempts to change the caps. Earlier this year, the planning department conducted outreach on possibly phasing out short-term rental homes. We met with several stakeholder groups. We met with the Hotel and Lodging Association, the Vacation Rental Association, the Alliance of Community Associations. There was one other group, and it's escaping me. Oh, the Realtors Association of Maui. And some idea of a phase out, some didn't. We also conducted a public meeting, and the vacation rental industry came out in full force at that public meeting, so much so that they filled our conference room and we had to separate the meeting into 2 sessions in order to accommodate everybody. And there were a few voices in that crowd that supported a phase out, but the overwhelming majority of the people there were opposed to any sort of phase out. The crowd consisted of various realtors, property managers, advocating for the jobs that they provide to landscapers and house cleaners. And so after that meeting, we hadn't really regrouped and decided where to go with this, and then COVID hit. And so we said, we're going to put any exploration of those issues on hold until after we get back to any consistent state of normal or the new normal. The council, however, initiated a bill to lower the caps to the number of existing permits and permits in the pipeline. And they sent that bill to us to take to the planning commissions. And actually just take it to the Maui and Lanai planning commissions because the council already acted to reduce the cap for vacation rentals on Molokai to 0. So we took that bill to the Lanai and Maui planning commissions. The Lanai planning commission supported it and at the same time considered a bill to establish a moratorium on issuing new B&B and STRH permits, which was a bill introduced by Councilmember Hokama. And they also recommended approval of that bill. So they approved reducing the caps, and they approved a moratorium on issuing new permits until the caps can be studied. And separately, we had been working with lanai on a bill to tweak the B&B and STRH laws, particularly for lanai. So they approved that bill, which established caps for lanai for the first time, but incorporated density provisions. So you can only have so many in a certain area. And so the Lanai Planning Commission also passed that bill. So those recommendations are going back to the County Council. The Maui Planning Commission, when considering the bill to lower the caps down to the current numbers, met on it 3 different times. The first time they kind of ran out of time. The second time they had thorough discussion, but could not get a majority vote one way or the other because we have a couple vacancies on that commission. And then the third time, again, they couldn't get a vote one way or the other, but they decided that they wanted the council to put more thought into the demand for vacation rentals and recommended that the caps be adjusted based on demand in each region. They felt that the council didn't have data behind their proposal to adjust the caps to the current numbers, which frankly didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because they're reducing it down to the current numbers. The only data you need is the current number. But that's what the Maui Planning Commission recommended. So we're putting their comments together with the comments from Lanai, and we'll be sending that back to the County Council for them to take up as they see fit.
So let me stop you just for a
second. The Planning Department, by the way, does support that bill.
Michelle, when you say that they have enough data really to assess the demand because there's no pending. There's no increase in the people requesting new permits. Is that what you mean?
Right. If the idea was we don't want to see any more short-term rental homes, then you cap them at where they are. I suppose the commission wanted to see, well, why don't you want to see any more short-term rental homes? There's demand for this type of accommodation. But it was unusual. I can usually follow the commission pretty well, whether I agree with them or disagree with them. And I didn't quite understand where they were coming from with this.
Okay.
I
guess all those bills will probably go to Tamara Paulton's planning land use committee.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Okay.
Then you asked about the legal vacation rentals that don't need permits. Generally, we call these the Minatoya properties because then Deputy Corporation Counsel Richard Minatoya authored the legal opinion that said these uses were allowed on these properties. We have sent a bill to the council that we call the loophole bill. And the loophole bill, so the Minatoya opinion, which then was codified in the county code. So now the Minatoya law says that apartment zone properties that got permits and were built by certain timeframes, which is when the law allowed vacation rentals in the apartment districts, could do vacation rentals forever. And what we believe is that the intention was for not only did they have to be permitted and built by a certain time, but they needed to be conducting vacation rental use because that use is effectively grandfathered. That's the term that we use, that it was lawful when it was established, and so it can continue even if the law changes. We don't believe that it was intended to allow properties that may have been permitted and built by that same deadline that have never done vacation rental before to convert tomorrow if they wanted to. So we drafted a bill, took it to the planning commissions, have sent it up to the council to close that loophole. So in addition to having to be built and permitted by a certain time frame, they also have to be operating. And so what that would do is there are 177 apartment zone properties that fall under the Minatoya laws. 103 of those have active vacation rental use, meaning that 74 of those properties don't have active vacation rental use. So the loophole bill would say those 74 can't start vacation rental. And that would keep the more than 3,000 units in those 74 apartments for long-term occupancy only. The total 177 properties have more than 11,000 units. And the 3,000 that the loophole bill would quote unquote save, but then they're also in the 103 properties that are doing vacation rental use, there are about 3,000 units that aren't doing that use. They're allowed to, but they're not. So we're saving the 3,000 by the loophole bill, but conceding that the other 3,000 could convert at any time. So the challenge is that with apartment properties, we go on a property-wide basis, not on a unit-by-unit basis, because that would just we'd be pulling our hair out. And it would also make it odd for that property that I can do vacation rental in my unit, but the guy across the hall can't. So we go on a property-wide basis. So just looking at those properties that have never done vacation rental before, even though they're allowed to, taking that right away in order to preserve those more than 3,000 units for long-term use. You asked how many condos are zoned hotel. There are about 3,000, or excuse me, there are about 2,000 units in condo properties that are zoned hotel.
Is that on top of all the Minatoya ones you're talking about?
That's in addition to the 11,000 Minatoya, yeah.
Okay.
How many are allowed but do not rent out short term? That's what I just indicated there about. So again, back to the Minatoya properties, there are about 11,000 units. About 6,000 of those units are not doing vacation rental. And with the loophole bill, about 3,000 of those we're going to take out of the short-term rental option altogether. But the other 3,000 would still be allowed. For enforcement purposes, it would be handy to have permit numbers for those properties, even though they don't need permits, have like a registration number. And the council actually budgeted funds for us this fiscal year to hire a contractor to issue those numbers. And we plan to pursue that after the council considers the loophole bill, because we don't want to go issuing registration numbers to those 3,000 units if we're intending to close that loophole and not allow them that opportunity. So, as you know, there was a bill at the legislature that would give the counties the authority to regulate the hosting platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. That bill ultimately failed, like it has in previous years. And But we had been approached by Expedia quite a while ago, and more recently Airbnb, to sign agreements with them whereby they would require that their advertisers list a permit number or a TMK. And that would make our enforcement a lot easier because we would just have to look for those numbers. And if an ad doesn't have the number, then it's likely unlawful. We would still have to verify that the permit number matches the property because that's what illegal operations do. They try to act like they're legal. They put up photos of a property that's not theirs. They use a permit number that's not theirs. So we'd still have to check on those, but it would certainly help requiring a permit or registration number to be listed. So now that that bill failed at the ledge, the idea of entering into those agreements is more appealing than it was before. There were some provisions in earlier drafts of agreements that I had seen that wouldn't work for us, but I'm taking another look and seeing if maybe we could get into those agreements after all.
Let me ask you another question here, Michelle, about the those hotel zoned condos. Would they be also going to get permit numbers from this contractor once your loophole bill is done?
They could. Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay.
Chair, I have some questions. Should we wait till the end of the presentation?
Well, I think it's easier if you've got a question about what she's just talked about. I think it's better to take it up now. That's be my preference. Well, go ahead and shoot.
Okay, I have 3 questions to this point. Director McClean, good morning and thanks for joining us. You mentioned under the loophole bill that there were 74 properties where there's currently no use, and that's what you're trying to close in the loophole bill. Do you have a list of those 74 properties? Is that available to the public online on a website?
I don't know if it's on a website yet. We transmitted that when we transmitted the loophole bill to the council. We attached lists of all of the apartment zone properties and how many units they had. So it differentiates between those that have some vacation rental and those that have 0.
Could you please transmit that to our commission? The list of 74 properties?
Certainly, yeah. I thought that I had, but if I didn't, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay, you may have, I just may not have seen it yet. What is your timeline for the council to take up this loophole bill?
Ooh, if I could have a timeline for council to do things.
Okay.
It's up to
If
Tasha.
you could wave a magic wand, do you have a goal in mind or a proposed timeline?
Yeah, I am reaching out to Tamara Paulton's Planning and Sustainable Land Use Committee to map out what they're going to be taking up over the next few months. So the chair certainly has her priorities, so we just need to check in and see where this fits in with her priorities. But we would love for it to be taken up sooner rather than later.
And when would the implementation of that, if approved by the council, when would that affect the public? That those would no longer be allowed for use?
It would be effective right away. That doesn't need to be phased in because it's not taking away an existing, the right that's currently being practiced. So it could take effect right away.
Okay, thank you. Going back to your comments on the lanai moratorium, establishment of caps and density provisions, what was the density provision approved by the Lanai Planning Commission?
I think that it was you could only have one per block.
What defines the block?
I think they said, I want to say, oh man. This was an initiative that Deputy Director Jordan Hart led. So I'm not up on the details, but
Okay.
I can transmit that to you guys to the bill that they considered at their last meeting.
Okay, and then my last topic of question is going back to the beginning of your presentation when you talked about warnings and violations and specifically fines. I know that there is a item for proposed settlement for fines with the council that's on tomorrow's agenda for Rick Markham, which I think was over $5 million in fines. Was those fines against him that are being proposed for settlement warnings or violations specifically to short-term rental use? And why would they not have been included in your numbers that you provided us?
Because those violations, I gave you statistics for 2019 and 2020.
Okay.
And those violations were issued before that. And the $5 million, there were actually two judgments of $2.7 million, and only one of those judgments related to short-term rental use. The other had to do with building permits and other violations that the planning department wasn't involved in. So
Okay.
The 2.7 related to the vacation rental use, and that the property involved with that has gone into bankruptcy. It's gotten very complicated, and I would defer to the litigator at Court Counsel to give more detail on that, because I don't want to misspeak because it's kind of confusing to me.
Or when you say gone into bankruptcy, is that the Paia Inn?
No, Rick Markham's operation was called the Nalu Kai Lodge.
Kai Lodge, okay. So you talked about in 19 there was 300,000 in fines. If we look at pre-19, because today you talked about 19 and 20, what are the total outstanding from any year fines against vacation rental use that have not been collected to date? We know this one of 2.7 million, but cumulatively, what's the big picture of opportunity for collection? And what steps are we taking to collect those fines?
I don't have a total, but I can ask our inspectors to put that together. And anything outstanding is either pending with the Board of Variances and Appeals, pending with Corporation Counsel and Collections, or has been appealed to court. There isn't anything that we're sitting on related to vacation rental enforcement. And once Corporation Counsel gets involved, it can take any number of paths. They'll write a demand letter, and then either hear back from the violator or the violator's counsel. If they start disputing the validity of the NOV, we say, you had your chance to appeal. You know, we're not here to dispute the validity of the violation. You had your chance to do that and you blew it. Then sometimes it turns into figuring out some sort of payment plan. If it, for some reason, ends up with any sort of settlement, then depending on the terms of that has to go to the council for approval. And then it's a matter of Court Counsel having the resources to file an action in court to collect. And that's what happened in the Rick Markham case. So it's rare that it goes that far, because that takes a heck of a lot of work on Court Counsel's part and on our part. So that doesn't happen very often. We try to get it resolved.
Okay.
Going there.
That's awesome. My last question, and I'm done, Chair Williams, is how much money has the County of Maui collected in short-term rental violation fines to date, ever? So we know there's 2.7 outstanding pre-19. You're going to get us a cumulative number what have we ever collected? And if you don't have a number, just a frame of reference. Are we talking 10,000, 100,000, a million?
I would say it's at least six figures. I can say that with complete confidence. It's at least six figures, but beyond that, I don't know. I can get that for you as well. So I'll follow up with what fines are outstanding and what fines have we collected.
I don't know that I need that much detail. I don't want to create more work. My whole point to asking you this question, I'm going to end my questioning, is how much time and effort are we spending versus a return on investment?
Right.
From the cost of government lens, that's really what I'm looking at. If we've collected 100,000, we've probably spent more than that in 1 year, and we're talking about multiple years. So thank you for your time and answers. Thank you, Chair.
Right. I would add, though, that whether or not we collect all that and whether or not that number is high or low, the non-monetary value is controlling this use that was such a big issue for so many people. So it's there's value in that, even if it's not a monetary value.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, this is Patrick O'Neill. I have a question.
Sure. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I know. I guess this is a kind of a crystal ball type question, but in your estimation, how many unpermitted short-term rental units do you think are out there?
Well, right now with COVID, I'd be surprised if there were a handful, if any. But before,
well, I'm not talking. Before COVID. Before
COVID, I'm quite comfortable saying fewer than 50, probably closer to 25. It's not at all like it used to be when people were thinking that there were thousands of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Director McClean, any further questions on that list that you haven't already addressed?
Well, your final question was county policies to encourage conversion of legal vacation rentals to long-term rental or second homes. We got blasted pretty good when we did our outreach on phasing out the caps or phasing out short-term rental homes. I still think that's a worthwhile dialogue to have because I don't feel that the outreach we conducted got to a majority of our residents. I do feel that there is support for that idea. We just didn't see it in that meeting that we had. An attrition type law might be a better way to go. So allow existing ones to keep operating. They can get renewed, they can carry on, but when they decide to stop operating or they get revoked or they expire, then new ones can't take their place. So just over time through attrition, those uses go away. At the same time, I would like to beef up what qualifies to be a bed and breakfast, because I know of a handful of circumstances of short-term rental homes that were so close to fitting the criteria for a B&B, but just didn't make it. So they're a short-term rental instead. But they have a local owner, they have a local operator. And those to me would be less impactful to the community than ones where, you know, the owner is completely detached from the operation. So if we are going to consider any curtailment of short-term rental homes, I would like to increase the opportunity for bed and breakfasts. One thing that we are talking about with the mayor's economic recovery task force, because so many vacation rental oriented businesses are hurting right now, to possibly offer some sort of incentive to them to enter into long-term leases for at least a year. So right now, these properties have no visitors, no revenue whatsoever. But chances are they're not interested in doing a long-term lease because they're hoping visitors will come back sooner rather than later. But if we could offer some kind of incentive for them to execute a long-term lease for a year, maybe they would take advantage of that. We could get some more people in long-term rentals. And then possibly after that year, they might like having a regular presence in their place rather than having to deal with visitors turning over. And we don't know how long COVID is going to last. Maybe it's going to last longer than that. So that might be something they want to continue to keep getting that revenue. So that's one option to try to get, at least temporarily, long-term use into vacation rentals. I think that I know, Chair, you've been quite interested in how property taxes can drive policy, that creating a much better tax incentive for long-term rentals might be something to examine too, because the owner-occupied rate, I believe, is the lowest residential rate. And vacation rental and timeshare are quite high, but then the non-owner occupant long-term residential, that might be an opportunity to look at to see if that could incentivize long-term rental. I mean, our property taxes are quite low anyway, so it could be relatively minor, but if the short-term rental home tax is super high and the long-term rental is low, that the financial benefit of doing short-term rental might be somewhat less, and more people might consider doing long.
Yeah, I'm told that the temporary investigation group on property tax reform, TIG2, is probably going to look at those, whether there's incentives either with exemptions or with a different class for long-term rentals, so we can do exactly that. And I know that Councilmember Paulton is concerned that we'd still leave a loophole for the Launi Upoko type places where they can rent their ohana out for $3,000 a month, and get this long-term rental benefit. But I think the answer to that is if you have the tiering in place, even for the long-term rental classification, then those properties will be in the top tier, and you can raise the rates just on them. So all of that's going to be debated, I believe, by the council over the next few months when they get back to the property tax TIG2. I have one other question about phasing out. I know at one time you talked about in public, and you and I have talked about phasing out some or all of the Minatoya properties. Because there's state law that allows you, the county, to do that so long as it gives a reasonable time frame for such phase outs. And I know you suggested, well, you could just phase out those 3,000 units that are in the buildings that are mixed right now but are not being used. And I know Marcy Martin has suggested phasing out the less valuable STRs that aren't near the ocean. But leaving the STRs near the ocean that are more valuable, leaving them alone. And so there's a couple options there, but my impression was that the opposition to that was going to be so strong that it probably isn't something the council will be willing to do. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, I agree there would be huge opposition to phasing out the Minatoyas. We did look at phasing out. So you look at the 103 properties that will not be affected by the loophole bill. And some of those have a really low percentage of vacation rental use. So we talked about maybe phasing those out. But I still think just on principle, there would be a lot of opposition to that because like with the STRHs, we talked about the STRH caps. And you'd think, well, wait, why are all the existing operators so concerned with leaving the caps units where they are. They're totally protected. No jobs are lost. What's the concern about this? The concern is that they see that as the first step. You know, we did the outreach to phase out. Now council is looking at holding the caps. And it's like, oh man, you know, what's the next step going to be? So with Minatoya, you know, fortunately, it seems like we have support for the loophole bill. But if you start phasing out even properties that have a super small percentage, I think there could be significant opposition to that because that's the first step. And if we don't stop it now, you know, what's going to be next? So it may be that for those low percentage properties, you know, we look at a handful of them and go unit by unit so that we're not taking away any existing right. But yeah, I think there would be tremendous opposition to that. And I would also be concerned from, you know, from the visitor side. If you phase out too many of those, where are those visitors going to go? There's still going to be the demand for it. And, you know, that has to be, if you're talking about any sort of phase out, doing that in conjunction with other controls or incentives to really understand what the tourism profile is going to be if you take those units out of circulation.
Michelle Del Rosario, I see your hand.
You have a question for the director. Director McClean, as a follow-up, you talked about your proposal to provide an incentive for moving short-term rentals into long-term lease for 1 year. Can you speak more specifically on what you're proposing, what that incentive would look like?
That is something that, that's an idea that's been batted around with the mayor's economic recovery task force. So right now it's just a concept. So we haven't talked more detail.
I guess what I'm asking is that tax credits is to the owners, is that we'll pay a portion of the rent so that you're not taking the full loss you would have from a short-term rental? Can you give us any specifics of those ideas?
We haven't gotten that far. You've brought up ideas that haven't come up yet, so it hasn't been talked through enough to figure out what mechanism that kind of incentive would follow, whether it's through taxes, whether it's an outright grant. We haven't gotten that far yet.
Thank you. I did want to share with the commission and thank you personally. I appreciate your ongoing efforts of community outreach. Specifically, I know you met recently with the Commercial Roundtable for commercial real estate agents here and others in the community. So I know it's a daunting time, but I want to thank you for the efforts you're making to bring all ideas to the table. I'm done, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Let me ask the other commissioners if anyone else has any questions now for Director McClean. All right, well, hearing none, Director McClean, thank you very much again for appearing today for us and answering all these questions. And we eventually intend to write a report about all these issues to the council and the mayor. But like you, we're kind of waiting for some of these things in process to come to fruition. And it's, I mean, we know that I sent everybody this morning a copy of the federal lawsuit that the Maui Vacation Rental Association has filed against you and the mayor for the Molokai moratorium or phase out. And we got testimony today in writing from the Maui Vacation Rental Association objecting in some ways to the loophole bill. And so we're watching all of this along with you as it goes on. All right, thank you very much. You can stay for the rest of the meeting or you're free to go.
Thank you. And I will send you those follow-ups, the information on fines and sending you the loophole bill and the lanai B&B and STRH bills. I'll send those to the committee today or tomorrow.
Great. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. Aloha.
All right, now we're to number 7 on the agenda, which is to discuss our budget for the commission. And let me just throw these out there. I know that the auditor has some comments to make, and I'm sure some